Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to bring those yellow buckets that you see down there up onto the bench so we can get the worms that live in those buckets fed. They're going to be getting an assortment of stuff out of my freezer, such as the banana peels and the plums. The moldy bread was not frozen, and I should probably soak that stuff because I like to soak the moldy bread before I put any substance like that into the worm bins. Seems like if you don't, the stuff will just get really moldy. But before we get started, let me just back off here so I could show you all something that I'm kind of proud of. I took the time yesterday to, yeah, believe it or not, do some housekeeping around here and take care of getting this bench cleared off. Long overdue. So yeah, really quick, let me just show you some stats on the buckets. They're 154 days of age today. Fed 12 times. Feeding today that they're getting is going to be feeding number 13. We've got this little experimental feeding in here for 116 days now. Corn cobs that were left to soak in water for a good many weeks before being fed to the worms, in the hope that perhaps by doing so, the soaking through of the material would allow the corn cobs to break down a little more quickly, because those of you that feed corn cobs to your worm bins know it's a very slow going material. So I'm going to get a glove on, get the buckets up on the bench, and we're going to get them fed. So let's get to work. Now, a little something I've been doing in many of my systems lately has been the application of bedding as a top dressing, and I'm fairly certain that's the way we left this system. So there you can see some of the shredded paper cardboard mix that's resting out on top, and then just as a matter of course, by coming in to feed, that stuff gets blended in, and I've done that now for a couple times, I believe, in these buckets. So last time too, we took whatever was resting out on top and blended it into the bed below, and then put some of this on top, and I think we even put some of this stuff below the feeding last time. So I had this feeling like maybe we can go a little bit more light weight on the bedding today. So my intention was to really just go with a napkin. I've got these really large napkins that I want to do away with, so I figured as part of the feeding today we would drop a napkin in beneath the food, and then follow suit with the top dressing approach of putting in a little bit more bedding on the top surface, and I think that should do. So here we've got a stem of a banana, and if we're careful, we'll be able to locate and check out these little bits of now 116 day in progress corn cob. It was over here in bucket number 1, well, bucket number 1 of 3, but it's the bucket labeled 3. 3, 4, and 5 are the buckets that we're using for this setup here. Buckets number 1 and 2, I believe, were in service elsewhere when we launched off these systems. So here in bucket number 3, I was not very careful, and here we go. I accidentally leaned onto one of the corn cob chunks and broke it. So the fact that you see that piece of corn cob right there in pieces already is not a indicator of how quickly the worm bin is capable of getting a corn cob to that stage of breakdown. That's just my rough handling. And I'm curious to see how much longer it's going to take for those corn cob bits to get to the point where we sort of treat them as done. Okay, here's some paper towels. Paper towel was the stuff that we rested down beneath the feeding zone last time. This I don't think is the same banana peel that we saw earlier. This one's still pretty much intact. This must have been one of the ones they got last time, because I believe banana peel's been a pretty regular thing. So 2 feedings ago they got banana peel, last time they got banana peel, and once again today they're getting more. So it takes a little while for them to work down the banana peel. It's a pretty fibrous and tough substance, but in time, just like everything else, it'll go. Everything's got its own rate at which it gets broken down in the worm bins. I was pretty thorough during the last check-in, going all the way down and tilling up all the material in these systems. And we're doing the same here in bucket number 3 today. But I think that's really just more to get a sense of how things look. And then I can kind of get a sense of how all 3 buckets are doing, just based on the way things look here in the first one we're checking. And then maybe we won't bother doing an inspection all the way through of the material in the other 2, because it's probably safe to assume that we've got a similar sort of situation going on. The moisture's all nice. All the bedding material that was out on the top surface has been, for the most part, blended in. And I guess perhaps just the blending in of that bedding is maybe a good rationalization for doing a nice thorough tilling, but I thought that maybe we can go a little bit less intrusive on the check-in of buckets number 4 and 5, with the assumption that things are a-okay over there, since everything here looks pretty good. So maybe that's the way we'll play it. So here in this carton, I've got the chunks of bread which have been soaked so as to not put the bread into the worm bin dry, because then it'll pretty much get ignored by the worms, it seems. It'll take a very long time for it to suck a sufficient quantity of moisture into itself so that the worms can begin taking advantage of it as a food source. So I've learned to prepare the bread that the worms are going to be getting, or any sort of baked goods like that. I prepare by first soaking it and then giving it to the worms. So this is one of the broken pieces of corn cob. There's one of the whole pieces of corn cob. Here's another whole piece of corn cob. And banana stems. I thought there was another corn cob floating around here someplace, but that's not all that important. Let's get these little guys covered back up, because here we're finished and we can now move on to feeding bucket number 4. Like I said before, covering up is going to include a little more of this prepared bedding of mine as sort of a top dressing. And since to me it seems like we're in pretty good shape from a bedding perspective, plus that large napkin that was included down at the bottom of the feeding, I think we're okay with being a little bit more reserved today in the application of bedding, because it did seem to me like last time we were quite generous, and even the time prior. So we'll leave it at that. Let's get bucket number 4 over here and see how they're doing. The approach will typically be, when I'm dealing with multiple systems, the approach would normally be that I don't go quite as thorough on checking everything over and plowing through. We'll just sort of assume that everything in here is quite similar to what we observed in bucket number 3, and take it on faith that we're not going to be in for any surprises. I suppose the one thing that's worth checking in on, since it is sort of a in-progress experiment, is the corncob bits. So I am taking care not to accidentally crack them. After I did that a few check-ins ago with that corncob over in bin number 3, I really kind of felt like I should be a little bit more mindful of preserving the integrity of the experiment. Not that it's all that important, but it would be interesting to see what it takes for the worm bin alone, without any help, to work the corn cobs down to the point where we don't even really consider them as still being around. It's hard to say, because at some point it will fragment into tiny little bits, and at that point there will still be corn cob bits in the system for sure, but they'll be kind of below the threshold of stuff that we would consider as objects that we're trying to track down and observe the status of. So It is kind of a weird experiment, and there's certainly no easy way to put strict controls around it. So I guess what I'm really curious of is to see if the prep method of soaking them helps with the breakdown process. I think the early indications, based on what we've seen here so far, is that it probably doesn't really make much of a difference. But whatever. We embarked on the experiment once upon a time, so there's certainly no harm in at least attempting to try to see it through as best we can to see what we see. So I think we've managed to streamline the check-in of bucket number 4 here by just making a few assumptions on the fact that things are probably pretty similar in here. Oh, here's the, I think this was not uncovered before. It must have just gotten pushed aside when we were excavating. So that was the last piece of corncob that we didn't really get a look at. So yeah, let's see what we could do about maintaining consistency here. That's one thing I try to do when I've got multiple systems running like this, is try to give them equal attention so that I can use them as sort of a measure relative to one another, so that I don't have to really treat each one as a unique individual system requiring close attention to detail. We can kind of assume that what we saw in one of them is representative of what's going on in the other systems as well. So here in bucket number 5, the last system we're going to be feeding, I wonder if we can really pick up the pace and accelerate to the finish line. Let's see what we can do with regards to that. I guess number 1, the objective was to blend in the stuff that was left out on the surface. It's easy enough. The corn cobs we don't need to inspect, but if we bump into them, we can certainly take a peek at them. But one of them was right there. And if we don't bump into any other ones, we don't have to go on a wild goose chase trying to find it. We'll just assume that it's making progress at a similar rate to what we observed in the other systems, and that we've still got some fairly intact corn cobs. They're making progress for sure, but they're certainly not approaching the finish line. Not by any measure, at least. That's the way it looks to me. And in can go the foods. Alrighty. In goes the grit. And, oh, let's not forget to backfill. Here's another corncob bit. Backfill the feeding zone. Not that it's all that important, but I was almost ready to replace the top covering newspaper, and we haven't even dropped in the top coating of top dressing of bedding materials. Now I believe we're finished. So I believe that pretty much gets us to the finish line here. Things look really nice in these systems. The moisture level looks good. The worms seem happy and healthy. Lots of nice castings beginning to pile up, and that's fair to expect for systems that are now over 150 days of age. But that's that. So we're now at the end of the video, and all I've got really left to do is to take care of getting some stuff cleaned up, put away, but that's all boring. I'm not going to keep you around for that. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.